to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and I'm currently teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Cynthia Kay, author of the book, Should You Stay or Should You Go? Navigating the Emotional Crossroads of Business Ownership. Cynthia, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me back on the podcast.
Thank you for joining us today. So before we get into your book, could you tell us about how you got to where you're at right now and what you're doing?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, I actually started, as a lot of people do, in the broadcasting industry and spent about 13 years working, doing all kinds of documentaries and feature reporting and investigative reporting. And then I got fired, which of course is not uncommon in that industry. But it really made me think about what did I want to do. And so I started a media production and communications company and have run that for 39 years. And then just this past year, sold off the media production part of the business and have really been focusing on my consulting, my teaching, and my writing. So I said, I'm not retired, definitely not retired, working hard.
And tell them some of the other work that you've been doing, because you've been teaching and speaking across the country. Talk a little bit about what you're doing there as well.
Sure. Well, what I've discovered is that a lot of companies, both large and small, have discovered, we talk about the skills gap. Well, there's a communications gap. And so I have been working with a number of companies to help them really ramp up the communication skills that people have. Because it's great if you have deep expertise, but without that ability to connect and communicate with people, we can't be effective in our jobs. So I do a lot of teaching of presentation, communication. I also work with a lot of businesses. I've written a number of business books. It's actually my fourth one. And I spend a lot of time thinking about what are the struggles that businesses are having and what's the knowledge that we need to impart to them. So, for example, I was really thrilled that I won one of your top 20 books of Best Business Mind books of 2025 for Small Business Big Success. And I've built on that book in the most recent book, which is called, as you said, Should You Stay or Should You Go? Because I do think that there is a huge need right now for business owners to think about the transition. And it's not me saying this. McKinsey just released a report, their 2026 report called The Great Ownership Transfer. And what we know is 6 million businesses are going to get transferred between now and 2035. And that's about $6 trillion worth of assets that are going to be transferred. I think US Bank called it the silver tsunami, and I am living it. So what I'm trying to do is really help other people navigate those crossroads in a way that's practical, frankly.
Well, I think that's great, and especially for family businesses where this is really important to them about how to make a smooth transition and get the next generation involved. Let's start with your book and part one, 7 Signs That You Should Go. And chapter one, Where's the Passion? Many entrepreneurs build their identity around their business. How can a founder recognize the difference between temporary burnout and the deeper loss of passion that signals it might be time to move on?
Yeah. And that's a great question because entrepreneurs are extremely passionate about business. I know I am. I love what I do, or I wouldn't be doing this. But there's no way that anyone can be passionate 100% of the time. And frankly, as you get down the road, maybe the things that you're passionate about change. But there is a difference between having that, I'm going to call it that temporary, oh gosh, I'm really overwhelmed or I'm frustrated or I'm facing something and I really don't want to cope with this anymore. And I think it's a matter of degree, quite honestly. In fact, I talk about, how much of the time are you passionate about what you do? And so I do think when you start to see the scales tip, and one of the things I've tried to do in the book is for every sign that I have questions that you need to ask yourself and be really honest about the answers. But when you start to see the scales tip one way or the other, it's really time to think about, do I need to change something or do I need to exit? And I want to just say before we go down the line, I'm not saying people should leave. I think there are lots of choices to remain relevant while you're working or to leave and reinvent yourself or to retire, but it's being aware of the signs that are pointing you towards one direction or another.
Yeah, I think, especially as you mentioned, people's whole identity is tied up in their business, and then they're wondering what they're going to do with themselves day to day.
Yeah, yeah. And
I,
one of the things that I think is different, these signs are a lot about someone's emotional readiness. I am not someone who can tell someone how to position their business financially or work on their EBITDA there are lots of advisors to do those things. What I see as missing in all of this is probably one of the most important decisions that a business owner will make in their life. And they need to consider how emotionally are they feeling about that decision. Because I've seen people go into depression after they sell their business because they didn't pay attention.
no question about it. In chapter two, your thick skin is getting thinner. Leaders are expected to handle criticism and stress. What are the warning signs that emotional fatigue is affecting leadership's judgment?
Yeah. Okay, so I want you to picture this. Something terrible happens to you at work, right? You're a business owner, and your first instinct is to go vent to everyone about what has gone wrong. I think venting is one of the things that we see people do a lot. They're just trying to let off steam. I think lashing out. I have seen business owners really, their personality almost starts to change. And rather than being thoughtful and being open-minded about things, someone criticizes them and they lash out because they're offended. And how dare someone question their ability to, make this decision? So I think being really tuned into those emotions gives you a sign that your thick skin is getting a lot thinner and maybe you're not up to the task.
Yeah, I think as you get older, sure, you get worn down
Sure,
and you're
you
saying, I'm
do.
tired of this bullshit. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
In
absolutely.
chapter three, your to-do list is getting longer. When procrastination starts replacing decisive action, how can a business owner determine the issue is overload, fear of change, or simply loss of motivation?
Well, so I think those three things are related. Because when you are overloaded, you become more frustrated, and you are less motivated to do something because you don't know where to start. But I guess here's what I would tell you. All three of those signs are signs that perhaps the business is not running the way it should be. Because if you're overloaded, you haven't done the work that you need to do to build the team and be able to delegate it so that you're not overloaded. If you're consistently frustrated, it's that there's some roadblocks in there that you need to work out. But if those signs are there, to me, that not wanting to do the thing that you loved so much, that's a sign. I mean, there are things that as I was going through my career, I didn't love to do anymore. I don't love filling out reports. hate it. But as a business owner, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of compliance. When it starts to feel like you just don't want to do those things anymore, if you can't offload it, or if there's a reason why you're not offloading it, it's a sign. You know, procrastination means you don't love doing that thing you loved, and that's a hard thing to admit.
I know I've been running this one organization and now I found a replacement for me and I've been running it for 2 decades because I just don't want to do it anymore.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's okay. I think this is why I talk about the emotion. We're so invested and we're on that grind and we're doing it. And we need to extend some grace to ourselves to say, you know what? I've evolved. I'm procrastinating because I really don't want to do that anymore. And that's okay because I'm going to do more exciting things now.
In chapter 4, change, oh my, and rapidly evolving markets, what separates entrepreneurs who successfully adapt from those who become caretakers of a declining business? And we've seen a lot of brand name companies over the past 25 years disappear that you never would have guessed, superpowers that no longer
Absolutely.
exist.
Yeah. Well, and I make a huge distinction between being a caretaker and being entrepreneurial. And you know, to me, it comes down to one simple thing, and that is a continual thirst for learning. If you do not have that consistent desire to learn to do something new, I mean, I can tell you in my business, I was the oldest person in my organization, and I was more adaptable to change than some of the 20 somethings that worked for me. And I found that to be fascinating. And I went, well, is it a matter of age? I don't think so. I think it's a matter of mindset. But you have to be willing to change because what got you to where you are is not going to take you to the next level. We all know that this rate of change is only going to keep accelerating. So if you don't have that need to learn and that desire to learn and a competitive spirit. You have to consistently be competitive, not in a bad way, but in a good way, wanting to do the very best you can do. If you do that, and if change really bothers you, it's time for maybe a change of status, and that might be retired.
I agree with that totally. If you're still not energized to take on these challenges, then you're in the wrong place. And I also agree with you that it's not about age, because I'm 65 and I'm constantly learning new things, adding new tools, all of that. And I'm wide open to learn all these things. But
Yeah.
I noticed that some of the younger people don't want to go and keep improving themselves, and hence they end up staying at the same place and being disappointed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, change is, and having said that, sometimes people change just for the sake of change. That's not good either. You know, we see a lot of companies that are just consistently in change. You know, you have to make the change and let that settle in and then move on.
In chapter 5, Sleepless Nights, every entrepreneur worries about their company, but when do sleepless nights become a signal that stress is harming both the leader and the organization?
Yeah, this one is, I think one of the things that I hear a lot whenever I talk with entrepreneurs, you know, one of the first questions is what keeps you up at night? We all talk about that, right?
Yeah.
I think in the most extreme situations, quite frankly, you become ill. I mean, I see people who literally, because of the stress, are consistently becoming sick. Their immune system is worn down. Their judgment is clouded because they're not getting the amount of sleep that they need. And I think that that's a really hard thing for people to admit. I will tell you, people around you see it before you see it. So I would pay attention to people saying, are you okay? You look a little tired today, or is something bothering you? Because you're giving off those cues. And And a lot of times when you're not sleeping well, you're also not thinking through things clearly. So, trying to get some short-term help to sleep is great, and really maybe even setting aside some time during the day to worry. Here's my worry time, so that when you do go to bed at night, you're getting a good night's sleep.
Absolutely. In chapter 6, new work trends have you shaking your head. With remote work, generational shifts, and changing expectations, how should leaders decide whether to adapt a new workplace trends or step aside for someone who will?
Yeah. And let me do a little disclaimer here because I think there is no one right answer, and this is highly dependent upon the industry and the type of work that you are doing. There are some people who wonder what all the fuss was about when during COVID we sent people home because they always work from home. Now, what I am seeing is a huge trend in several of my customers bringing people back into the office 4 days a week. There are lots of trends. I think this is a place where business owners need to experiment. And I think that if you don't experiment, you're missing out on some things that could be extremely positive for the workforce. So, for example, in my place, I have people who were working from home 1 day a week. But I really think it's important, especially in creative situations, that people are together, that they can work on things together, that, so much happens that is just as you're walking by someone's, workspace. So um, I think there are trends. I think we need to be aware of them. And I think we have to pick and choose which ones apply to us. But if you are unwilling to just even consider them, then I think you're going to be limiting the number of people who want to come and work with you because people like to see organizations that are innovative in the way in which we work.
Yeah, I think also the people decide on their own if, in fact, that kind of organization is right for them because there's no way that you can evaluate potential leaders in your organization if you're not working with them
Abs-
real and in person every day. And
Yeah,
so if you're somebody who's not aspiring to move up in leadership, then there's probably nothing wrong with you working from home. But
absolutely.
and you're right, certain industries, like if you're a lawyer or an accountant, you definitely can be working from home because there's really no collaboration. If you think about a law firm and there's 200 lawyers, it's 200 individual business people all under the name of one law firm. But rarely do they actually work together unless it's a big client and
Yeah.
there's a few lawyers tied to that particular client for sure.
Hmm.
In chapter 6, new work trends have you shaking your head. With remote work and generational shifts and changing expectations, how should leaders decide where to adapt the workplace trends? Oh, we talked about that. I'm
We
sorry.
did. I
Yeah, I got to mark
I
that.
see you've read all the chapters. I'm very impressed.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And there's so many that we could only do one question per chapter. Um, Chapter 7, technology is not your friend. Technology is transforming every industry, and how can business owners tell whether their resistance to new technology is reasonable caution or a sign they're falling behind? I think that's really big now with AI.
Yeah, and one of the things that I have found is that, let's just take a cell phone as an example. A lot of people won't get a new cell phone because they don't want to learn all the new buttons, or they don't want to get a new computer because they don't want to learn or upgrade their software. The problem is that technology does not stand still. And too often, what I find is that business owners are not thinking about using the technology as a competitive advantage and not as something that stands over there, but as something that is integrated into everything that they do. So, what I often recommend is, you don't go find those shiny pennies and just adopt the technology. You really need to look at doing a technology audit, and there are companies who will do this, who will come in and show you. And often there are people who work at enterprise level, and then there are people who work on small business, and the fees vary, but it's well worth it to have someone come in and do an audit and look at the systems you're using and give you some ideas about where can you automate? What can you do? I mean, even something as simple as using some of the note taker technologies for meetings, where people have a fear of that. And yet, oh my gosh, it saves you having to do that task of the laborious taking of notes and then compiling them. And all of a sudden it's done for you. And all you have to do is kind of tweak it. And now you've got great follow up. So simple tools like that, and then more complex tools. But, you know, technology, you have to embrace it. Technology, if it's not your friend, then you may be out of step with where the world is today.
Oh, I think you have to embrace all these new things and learn them, or you're going to get run over for sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
because your competition is using the tools.
yeah, and when you talked about learning communication skills, what you're teaching, I tell my students that's the only thing that differentiates them from AI is their ability to communicate their own original ideas in a public forum. In
Absolutely.
and if you can't do that, then your boss doesn't need you, because they can get AI to do whatever they want, or they can hire virtual assistants to do that. And because I have students who don't participate, but now that I've been telling them that this is the only thing that separates them, now I'm having a hard time getting through my 3 hours of class because everybody raises their hand to express themselves. It's amazing how much
But
that's changed.
this is a great problem to have, Mark. You're
Yeah.
teaching them, and what is sad to me is we have really an entire generation that because of technology and not balancing it, have lost some really critical skills.
Yeah, and especially because I would have students, nobody raising their hand, and I'd say, okay, I just want you to know that if you don't raise your hand, I will call on you because you need the practice of expressing yourself in public. So I'm not trying to embarrass you, but if I don't do this for you, then I'm certainly shortchanging you in mastering a skill that you absolutely need. So
Mhm.
please help me out here and participate and raise your hands. And so now I have 5 classes this semester, and everybody is raising their hands almost at every question that I ask.
Uh-huh.
So that's a good thing. In chapter 8, you love what you do. For entrepreneurs who still love their work, what are the signals that staying engaged in the business is still the right decision?
Well, this one's easy. So I think if we are honest with ourselves, um, we know what we are projecting. I can tell you a simple sign for me. In any given week, I can't tell you how many people will say to me, "Wow, you really love what you do." And I go, "I do." Why? Because you can see it. And I think if you love what you do and you are still good at what you do not let someone tell you that you have to retire at some magic age or you have to move on or you have to move up. It's you have to love what you do. And part of the reason I wrote this book, quite honestly, I got tired of people asking me when I was going to retire because I have no really inclination that I am going to retire for many, many, many years. And yet many of my peers have retired. But I think joy, people who love what they do still, you know the feeling. And you know, now what you love may change. I can tell you now, what I love is seeing people that I work with who are growing and developing in their careers and they're working their way up the ladder and they're taking on things that I used to do and I don't need to do them. I love that. So, but finding something that you love and you are good at and sticking with it is great because then you don't have to go reinvent yourself.
I find the people who continue to stay in the game live longer and happier lives.
Oh, there's
Uh,
studies.
yeah, and my brother-in-law was chief legal counsel for one of the biggest mutual funds, and he retired at 58, but he then started teaching law school
Yeah.
at the University of Maryland, and serves on four different boards,
Yeah.
and has taken up piano and guitar lessons. So he's as busy now. It's just a different type of busy, and
Yeah.
it's kept him sharp, and he's incredibly happy. So that's worked out well for him. It's when you just decide you're going to play golf every day that you have a brain meltdown.
Yeah.
In chapter 9, you build a supportive team. How does building a strong leadership team influence the decision to stay in the business longer rather than exit?
Yeah. So I find sometimes when I have talked to business owners that they are sorry that they left because they say, gosh, I built this great team and I was having so much fun and I was being able to do more things and I was being able to work at a higher level because of this team that I have built. When you've done that and you've been able to delegate out those things, you can stay working longer. A lot of times, business owners will insist that their employees take vacation, but they don't go anywhere. They don't take vacation. When you've got a great team, you get to go take the vacation, right? You get to go recharge your batteries and then come back and start new things. So, having built that team, when you've done that, stay and enjoy it. Why would you leave if you've done that and you are loving what you do? It's kind of like people who paint their house just before they move, right? They paint it so someone else will enjoy it when they should have maybe painted it and lived in it for a while.
You're right about that. And then they have real regrets once they see that new coat of paint on, and they wish they had taken advantage of it for sure.
Yeah.
In chapter 10, you operate at peak performance. If a founder still feels energized and effective, how should they think about succession planning without losing momentum?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think is really critical, and I talk about, you should have an exit plan from the day you open the door. Don't wait until you're at the age where you need to think about succession planning because even though you have a plan, I mean, it's going to change over time. But if you have a plan in place, you are not spending a lot of valuable time doing things that are pulling you away from your work. Selling a business is like having a whole new job. I mean, you have two jobs when you're selling, you're in the process of selling. And so it's difficult to operate at peak performance. But if you've got that plan in place, that plan works, you're working it, but you're still able to devote the time that you need to the business. And honestly, if you don't do that, if you don't consistently operate at peak performance, the value of your business is going down every day. And and then what you have to sell is being diminished. So operating at peak performance is something that's really critical, and especially as you get towards those years where looking at that trend of what you're doing is going to dictate what you're going to get for the value of that business.
Yeah, when you take your eye off the ball, and especially when you're focusing on selling the business, now the acquirer reduces the price because your sales have gone down the quarter,
Sure.
or any of those kinds of things, and now
Yeah.
you're like, oh my God, why did I do that? I learned that the hard way on a turnaround that I did. Uh,
Yeah.
chap Chapter 11, your entrepreneurial spirit is strong. Many entrepreneurs thrive on building and creating. How can they channel the spirit while also preparing for eventual transition?
Yeah. So, you know, it's hard to pinpoint what it is that is the entrepreneurial spirit because I think for every person it is so very different. But I'm gonna bring it down to one thing. Curiosity and this constant want and need to keep creating and building. So let's say you have a project, pet project you've started and you love it and it's building, but it's going to take a year, right, for this thing to go. You may not want to leave. Your entrepreneurial spirit is still strong. You don't want to leave a pet project and then maybe no one takes it over. So when your spirit is strong and you're working on things that you love, I don't know that that is the time to leave. But you also have to be thinking about when do you do this? Because if you suddenly decide that you want to transition and you've not put the building blocks in place, then when you finally do transition, you don't know what you're transitioning to. I mean, I can tell you my Cynthia Kay biz, that business entity was in place for many years before I sold my media production company off, right? I had done the hard work to create those revenue streams and was really, I mean, honestly, it was time for me to leave. I knew it. But my spirit was still strong, but I had something to go to. And that kind of gets to that piece of legacy, right? It kind of ties right into what do you want your legacy to be? And so, I think, and I also think that industries can play a part in entrepreneurial spirit too, because we all know there's hot industries and there's cold industries, right? And so it's easy for your spirit to be very strong when you're in a booming industry. It's harder when perhaps the industry is contracting or changing dramatically.
Yeah, that happened to my dad. He was in the medical equipment business, and for a while, that business was a very hot business. And then
Yeah.
the government changed how they remunerated him, and
Hmm.
then the business went from being a great business to where the Javits Center for their big national conference was canceled and empty. And my father had no idea, and we went, and there was nobody at the Javits Center. And then we found out it was canceled.
Yeah. Well, and there's this thing that's called tokenizing of businesses. We're hearing a lot about that. That's one of the new terms. Um, and there are so many things that are happening to industries that if you're not, and you can become out of date so quickly that that it's amazing. So you have to really be every day thinking about learning and doing something and going to industry conferences or listening to podcasts. I was listening to several of yours this past week and listening to some of the people who are talking about all of the things that they're doing. And they're in different industries, but a lot of the ideas apply to mine. So that's the sort of thing that you have to consistently be doing.
Um, in chapter 12, you need the money. Financial realities often affect the stay or go decision. How should entrepreneurs balance financial needs with personal fulfillment?
Yeah. Um, Money is tricky because what one person believes will be a comfortable retirement for another person is not. I like to look at it this way. I like to say to people, you think you're going to need less money in retirement. What we know, and I've talked to the experts, is that's actually not the case, that people do not adjust their lifestyles when they move into a different phase. And so if you think you're going to need less money, that's probably not the case. But the question is what do you love to do? What is it that emotionally feeds your soul? If it's spending time with family, the cost of that is far less than traveling the world, right? By yourself or with friends or family. So I think being realistic about what it is that makes you happy and understanding what the costs of that will be. I also think that one of the decisions that people that's causing people to really extend their stay in the workplace is that they may be caring for elderly parents who don't have the means. I have a number of people that I know that are doing that. Or they still have children who are in school or who are not doing well. Or perhaps they've gone through a bankruptcy or a downsizing and they lost it. So, this is where really working closely with good advisors, and I'm not talking about brokers, I'm talking about wealth advisors. I'm talking about people who holistically look at what you are doing, to help you figure out what's important. And quite frankly, if you don't have the money and your retirement has taken a hit, you need to stay working for a while. That's one of the reasons people do stay working.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially right now, it's good. The economy is very crazy. The stocks are up and down. Yeah, a lot of people are rethinking about can they really afford to retire, especially in the US. In chapter 13, you have not defined your legacy. How does
Mhm.
thinking about legacy change the way entrepreneurs evaluate whether to keep leading their own company?
Yeah. So, this concept of legacy is something that I have done a lot of studying. And you talk about how do you maintain. I actually went through a legacy program at the Edward Lowe Foundation, and it kind of helps founders and business owners define what is it that you want. Do you want people to remember your name? Do you want to create generational wealth to hand down to the family? Do you want to do something that has an impact on the world? Do you want to sell your company for as much money as you can so you can go sit on a beach and eat bonbons? What is the legacy? So I can tell you, for me, the reason I felt it was time for me to exit the production part of the business and concentrate on this is that my legacy is that I have spent a lot of time and energy and really done hard work in thinking about what I want to do. And I know what I want my impact to be is I want to give back because a lot of people helped me. A lot of people assisted me on my journey throughout 39 years. Never asking for anything, just were there. My goal now is write, teach, speak so that I can help other people. That's my legacy. When people know what their legacy is, it makes it easier to move to the next thing. But if you haven't defined the legacy, if you don't know where you're going, then you may want to stay working for a while until you figure it out. Because you might find, and I know people who have done this, who have sold their business and then are very sorry that they have done that. They're sorry that they left because they didn't have a plan. They didn't know what their legacy was going to be.
I always remember on 2020, the founder of U-Haul having to be dragged out by security by his own sons
Hmm.
because he realized he never should have given them or sold them the business, and he didn't know what to do with himself. And he became so difficult that the kids actually called the police and had him dragged out of the out of his own building.
Yeah. So I have to tell you, my father, who sold a business in his 60s, still worked until he was 92 years of age. He had a passion for bridge. He was a life master, right? And during his working years, he would go and play bridge and he would direct bridge games. He loved teaching people to play bridge and he loved directing bridge games. And in his retirement, he was sought after to go and direct bridge games. And then when my sister in her business needed help, my dad moved up to Raleigh, North Carolina from Florida. He unretired and worked in her business until he was 92. He loved what he did. His legacy was lived out through the people that he touched and through all of the people that came to him for advice over the years. And, that's a great legacy to have. I mean, he was papu or grandpa to a whole lot of people. and he was the wise individual that helped them. So the legacy piece is it's important. We all want to be remembered for something.
In chapter 14, you are not emotionally ready. You emphasize emotional readiness throughout the book.
Yeah,
Why is emotional preparation often more difficult than financial preparation for an exit? And I think it's because you don't know who you are
yeah,
when you sold the business. I mean, all of a
yeah,
sudden you're depressed because you have nowhere to go in the morning
yeah.
anymore. You have no purpose.
So, I think this question of emotional readiness, as business owners, what are we taught to do? We are taught to use our heads, right? We're taught to use reason as opposed to going with your gut or your emotion. And yet, this is one time when I think not paying attention to being emotionally ready, as you say, can lead to severe depression. And I have seen this happen. I can tell you that many years ago, I took a trip out of state to meet a potential buyer, and everything looked like it was perfect. And I I left their office and I got to the airport, and I literally sat and cried in the airport. And I'm not a person who cries, not about business, right? And it was telling to me that I was so emotionally tied to this business that I had to start to do things to really figure out what was my persona, what was my purpose. And your business is not your purpose. Your purpose is something different. But you have to understand, are you emotionally ready? I know people who get physically sick at the thought of selling the business, have anxiety over it. This is why I've got an emotional checklist. And I think it's really important because you've spent a lot of your time doing this. And if you don't get emotionally ready, um, that path in front of you is not going to be a good one. You become miserable.
Yeah, how many people that you've met in your lifetime feel exactly that way and they feel rudderless
Yeah.
because they haven't prepared for that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this actual thing called leisure sickness, believe it or not. It's a real thing. I who knew?
So
Oh
in
my gosh.
chapter 15, taking timing is critical. When
Yeah,
evaluating an exit, what are the key indicators that the time is right both personally and strategically for the business?
yeah. So I like to think about, when you're looking at the timing, you're looking at the options, right? Stay, remain relevant in what you're doing. Okay. Maybe your organization still needs you. That's why you will stay and not make the exit. I can tell you, I had an exit plan in place easily well over 5 years ago. And it was one that I was in the process of executing. And due to the unfortunate illness, and actually, most recently, the individual passed away. It was part of my succession plan, and that plan had to change. So I had to stay in the business, stay relevant, stay working. Timing in that case was due to what was happening in the business. Timing can also be what is happening within your industry, right? If your industry is making a massive change and you are not someone that wants to make that massive change, then perhaps the timing is right for you to move to do something different. Doesn't mean you have to do nothing. It may be time to reinvent yourself, right? Or it could be that you decide you want to retire. I jokingly say go sit on a beach and eat bonbons, but you know what? For people who have worked all of their life and now want to devote time because their family needs them. Several of the business owners I've talked to say they were so happy that they moved on because it coincided with the illness of a parent or something that happened to a spouse. And the timing of that worked for them because they were able to spend more time with that loved one. So timing is really critical. And also I think You talked about family-owned businesses.
Yep.
Sometimes that next generation is ready. And if you do not move on, what you are doing is causing that person to become demotivated, causing that person to really not live up to their full potential. I think it's sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves, and I'm actually working on a story for my next book of someone who moved on because the successor that they were bringing in was ready sooner than they thought. And they went, you know what, for the good of the organization, I need to move on. So you have to look at timing, and it's very individual, but paying attention to those things, what is good for you personally, what is good for your organization, and balancing those things.
Chapter 16, Duncan Worldwide, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan. What lesson from Dr. Roger Dean Duncan's journey best illustrates how leaders can transition successfully? And you have to explain who he is.
Oh, I know. So Dr. Roger Dean Duncan, one of my most favorite people, and just a truly wonderful individual. This is someone who has a history that is so rich. Worked for two presidents, was an editor of newspapers, worked for quite a number of global companies, and then started his own business. He recently, and I don't know his exact age, but I'm pretty sure he's in his 80s, started a podcast called Leadership. He is doing things in his 80s that some people wouldn't even think about doing in their 50s, right? So here's the lesson that I have learned from him. The lesson is you can create your own world. And if you create that perfect situation, you can work as long as you want to work and never retire. And there are other examples in the book. I'll just tie one to it. Bob Fish, Big B Coffee, a very similar kind of situation, much younger person here. But he has created an organization where he's the visionary and he doesn't need to be involved in the day to day. And as a result of that, he can work for as long as he wants to work. So, the lessons of people that I've talked to in the book, they're all very different, but I've learned something from every single one of them.
Uh, in chapter 17, the Diaz group, April Diaz. What did April Diaz's experience reveal about leadership succession and preparing the next generation? Again, you have to tell the audience a little about who April
Sure.
Diaz is.
So April Diaz and her family own the Diaz Group and Delaco Steel. This is a company that truly is a story of immigrants coming to this country with nothing and building a phenomenal and sustainable business that is a recognized leader in several different industries, but in the steel business. The thing about April is that family businesses are, as we've talked about, tricky, but they did such a good job. Her father brought the children in at a young age and they worked the business. In fact, April said she's done every single job except run a slitter and go up in a crane. I think those are the only two things they wouldn't let her do. But she is the CEO of the company now. There were four siblings. Two went into the business, two took a step back. It's inspirational how they brought the family business up. They now have the third generation of people who are coming into the business. But here's what's the story. None of the children or grandchildren of Geraldo Diaz were expected to work in the business. It was an opportunity, and they were told they had to earn it. And that is something that April has told the next generation coming. You can't sit in my seat unless you can do what I can do and take the business to the next level. So that's a fabulous story that people can read. And I was just really inspired by what they are doing and giving back to the community at the same time.
Well, I think that was definitely smart. I've worked with some family businesses that start the kids in the janitorial part of the business, and then they have a rotation that they work their way up over 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And they tell them, hey, there are 300 families counting on us to make good, smart decisions. We just can't go and hand you the business. And I worked with a business that put their child right out of college in a senior VP role. And within 5 years, they were out of business.
Yeah.
And the best employees ended up leaving.
It kind of ties to another story that's in the book, Podpack International. Here's a story of a
That's the next
person.
question.
Yeah. Well, and those two things tie together so well because here's an example of a gentleman who was working in the business, had two sons working in the business, and I so appreciated him sharing this story with me because he told me the story about how he actually cut the deal to sell the business and didn't tell his two sons who were working in it. And I was like, Tom, how could you have done this? And he said, I knew that they couldn't and shouldn't run the business. He made a very educated decision. He said, and I don't want to be the bank. If I passed it to them, I'd be the bank. And I think some people might look at that and say, well, that's a terrible thing. But no, to your point, think about all of the families that are working for that business. You have built it, you have to entrust it to someone that's going to care for it.
Oh, absolutely. Because everybody else is depending on you.
Mhm.
Uh, On chapter 19, on-site wellness, Mary Klein built a company focused on well-being. How did her story illustrate the connection between personal values and business decisions?
Yeah. So this is an interesting story. Mary had a partner. They were in the wellness business, and her partner became quite ill, and in fact died of cancer, succumbed to breast cancer. And that health and the idea of well-being is one that she carried out not just in the services that she provided, but concerned about the health and the welfare of her team and how she was going to transition that. And she ended up merging with another company that was also health focused, and has it's been a wonderful story, but it was really the way in which she cared for people, and cared for her business that I think was inspirational.
Arbor Strategy Group,
Yes.
Phil Ruse approached leadership strategically. What leadership principle from his experience could benefit founders thinking about exit planning? You have to explain who he is and what he did.
Oh gosh, so Phil owned a phenomenal company, and it's a tough one to explain, but um, he had let me talk a little bit about his leadership strategy. Um, in this company, he grew this business, and to the point where he knew that taking it to the next level was important because he wanted his people to benefit from the company as much as he did. And so he actually sold the company, but stayed on, I call it golden handcuffs, for the good of his employees for 3 years. That was his strategy. He could have just left and done it, but he, like a really wonderful entrepreneur, considered the moves, not just for him personally, but for his employees, and they benefited financially. And then he went on to start other companies. The thing I love about him is he ended up going into public service, works for the state of Michigan now, and he's still not done. I'm waiting to see what he's going to do, but he was very strategic about when he left and what his next moves were, and I that was the lesson that I took from him. Not making the quick buck, but strategically, what do you do?
In chapter 21, Skinny Teas, Linda Schlesinger Wagner, entrepreneurial path involved creativity and reinvention. What does her story teach about resilience and business ownership? So tell us about her business.
Oh, I love Linda. She is one of my favorite people. Can you tell I'm personally invested in these people? So Linda started a business in her 60s when most people are retiring, right?
Yep.
She had huge experience in the retail and apparel business, went through a divorce, was on her own, needed to make a living, and started this business. And when you talk about starting a business from nothing, worked how many jobs to get the business up and running. Today, you will see her on Good Morning America and QVC, has a tremendous online presence. But just think about what has happened to the apparel business. Think about what has happened with the closing of retail outlets. Think about COVID and e-commerce. And this woman has navigated all of those challenges and does it so gracefully, and at the same time is so giving to other entrepreneurs. She's another example of someone that I don't think will be retiring anytime soon. I actually do know her retirement plan, but I'm not allowed to say it. But it's fascinating, and hopefully one day I'll share that story.
Well, and that's one of the great things about your book is that you have all these amazing stories that are very relatable and the way you laid them out. So I so appreciate that and it made the book an easy read. In chapter 22, Online Technologies, Yan Ness, technology entrepreneurs also often face rapid industry shifts. What
Yeah.
did Yan Ness's story reveal about adapting to disruption?
Yeah. Jan is another one of my favorite people because he is such a big thinker. So Jan started in the technology business right when the dot-com was like everything was falling apart. So he started in the industry as everybody else was getting out and people thought he was crazy. He began that business and moved from dial up, that weird noise
Yeah,
we all had.
yeah.
Okay, dial up. Yep. He moved away. That's when he started, ended up moving into running data centers for companies, got to a point where he knew that if he wanted the company to go to the next phase, because of the capital demands, right? In an equipment heavy and in a technology forward business, he needed investors, and so he actually did sold to investors. And what I love about Jan is the story that he shared that he did what a lot of people do, bought a big boat, went sailing, went to Europe, came home, sat on the couch, and then said, "What the hell do I do next?" And then figured it out. He's invested in companies. He's now the CEO of a company called Verge.io. He just shows how constantly reinventing and making those moves and not doing the same thing at the next place you go to, but making it another unique experience. That's the lesson.
Um, this has to do with you. In the final case study, you share your own journey. What was the most difficult personal realization you faced while deciding whether to stay or go yourself?
How much time do you have?
We got 2 minutes.
We got 2 minutes. Well, here's what I will tell you. This was a decision that part of the reason I wrote this book is this book was all of the years of my sitting down and journaling about all of the different signs to stay and to go and what were the options. I will tell you that I think probably the most difficult thing happened to me early on. By the time I got to the point of selling, because I was emotionally ready to do it, it wasn't difficult. But really, the difficult piece is finding the right buyer, finding someone that you believe is going to keep the culture, take good care of this thing that you have created. I think that's what we all want. I think that's probably the hardest task.
Yeah, you put your baby up for adoption and you want to make sure you have a good parent, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. As I said, this is a really easy book to get through with a lot of quality information and
Thank
substantive,
you.
without being academic. It was very
Yeah,
practical, and
thank
that's what
you.
I enjoyed about it. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we certainly look forward to have you come back when you come out with the next book,
I'm working
for
on
sure.
two. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah. So we're looking forward to that. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and have a great weekend.